So I restarted my computer. I'm still not getting great performance. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but if I figure it out, I'm going to let you be the first to know. So we're going to keep chugging on. We're going to look at now making surfaces and panels out of this. So it's really quite a simple bunch of steps. We're going to take that same idea about, let me just see if I could slide over here, that surface array and the amount of brightness. We're going to feed them in to create a sense of geometry by translating the points. So we have all of those points. We're going to move the points higher or lower based on that intensity that's coming out of our contrast. And we're going to feed that three-dimensional set of points into a NURB surface by points, and that'll create a curvilinear surface for us. And then we can divide that up into panels to triangulate it if we were to want to make that out of, let's say, fabricated metal panels or glass panels or something like that. I've also want you to get this first experience with the idea of being able to turn on and off components. So we have this this kind of a Boolean switch, or a way of a gate, so to speak, of passing data that allows us to turn on or off any one of those elements. And then, so I can turn off the circles, or I can turn off the panels and run one or the other. So we'll jump into Dynamo and start doing the coding for this. So let's do a little bit of our house cleaning first here. I want to change out to Revit, all of this node into a single group. So I'm going to select all of those. Let's try to go that way. Let's create a group. I'm going to call this out to Revit. And we'll be able to use this again just by copying it over. And then once again, I said that idea of being able to turn this on and off. So I'm going to look for a gate, and that's called a data gate. And we'll use two of those, so I'll just copy and paste. And I'll rename this one dots or frit. And I'll call this one panels. And those are just labeling the switches, so to speak. All right, I'll accept that. And so instead of taking this list directly from here, that brightness value system, I'm going to drag that into this one and then connect it here. And so that allows me to turn that on and off. And if I want to now pass through data, I can either open it or close it. And then, so now it's in the closed mode. And then we're going to put that same list into the panels, and we'll be able to do the same thing down below when we create our panel system. And I'll put these together, and let's see what we'll call them. Let me see what I called them before. Switches. Oops. Group them. Or dot switches. Just like turning on lights. Okay, so that's set up. And now let's start with our definition, or what we want to do to create our surface panels. So the idea with the panels are we have all of these dots, and we have these of the array that we created, the 64 by 64 bit array. And now in order to get some depth out of that, we can transpose those points in one direction, which will be the Y direction. So let's start with the idea of doing a geometry translate. And X, Y, and Z direction. So we're going to put in that geometry, which will be that array, and we're going to put in, so the original geometry is all of those points. That's the 64 by 64, just a standard grid. And then the translation, the Y translation, we're going to take the values that are coming off of our image and moving that in or out depending on how bright it is. Except we need to do a little bit of math in order to make that, kind of like give it an ability to be magnified, so to speak. So I'm going to make a code block, because that y is a very small change in value right now. So I'm going to use a code block to create a formula. And the formula I'm going to use is, I'm going to take x times y. That just gives us a multiplier. So I have an x and a y input. And I'm going to make a number slider. Oops. And I won't give, we could call this intensity if you wanted to. And I'll leave this at, well, the last setting I had was 2.5, so I'll leave that. Let me rename it. I'll call it depth intensity. And we're going to feed that into the y value. So now every number that we have, we're going to multiply it by 2.5. And now we're really going to drag that value into the y translation. So we're taking the x, multiplying by 2.5 to get our geometry translate out. And I'm going to I've turned all the previews off I can of all of these things. And I'm going to go ahead and run this just to see what that geometry looks like. So I'm going to do that now. It might take a few minutes, so I'll hit on pause. Okay, so that just took a few seconds for it to complete. And you'll notice now that we have these dots that are kind of in or out of plane, depending on how dark they are, the further apart they are, depending on how bright they'll be really close to each other, kind of similar to what we had with the size of our dots. But now it's just a matter of moving in and out of that y plane. Let's see if I can actually rotate here a little bit. Maybe you can see this better. There, now you can see the dots moving in three-dimensional space. So you have the base dots and then the dots that have been transposed. So now that we have that created, now we can actually make a NURB surface out of that. So I'm going to look for NURBS. I think dot surface. Let's see if it says NURB surface. A NURB surface dot by points. And it's like you have to write the whole thing out. All right, so that's NURB surface by points. Get my thing back here. Let's put the points in. We don't need it. It'll default to a UV degree value to it. I'm going to turn the preview off now of those dots. I'd like to get rid of the other sets of dots. I don't know why they're still showing here. Let's see, I plugged them in somewhere where they're previewing still. Let me turn the preview off of that. There we go. So now we don't have any of those extra points showing. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. It looks like it's giving me a problem because of, well, it looks okay there. So let's see what, go back to Dynamo. Actually, it ran that right away. So we have that NURB surface. Let me go back to Dynamo now. And you can see that three-dimensionality of the NURB surface created. So that's kind of cool. You can imagine, but that's actually nothing that's very easy to build because it's not panelized or anything like that. So let me just see if I can rotate this a little bit. All right, so now you can see that three-dimensional effect pretty well. And the next thing I want to do is you could actually just output this to Revit again. And we could just feed this in as our geometry. I'll hit run. I'll hit pause while it takes its painful time to do it. That ran relatively quickly. So now I have that NURB surface inside of Revit. Let me drag it off here a little bit away from the what Dynamo creates. And then there's that NURB surface. It looks a little dark. I think it's because it almost looks like it's working in reverse of what we'd want. So I almost want to add a negative value to that to get it to pop the other direction. But we really actually don't want to use this NURB surface because that's just a curved surface. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I'm going to go back now to Dynamo, and I'm going to look at adding, adding in a triangulation or a panel system to go along with this. So this is a lunchbox thing. If you have it plugged in, it's a panel, a triangle panel. So I'm going to go to, actually, let's see if I can find it in lunchbox directly. Geometry, panel, triangle, use triangle A. And I placed that on the surface for us. So now we're going to take that NURB surface and put it in here. And we need to divide this off now. We need it to have like, you know, an amount of panels to it. So I'm just going to put a number value in. We'll make it, I put 40 and that worked pretty good the last time. And it sets it 64 by 64. The UV space will be the same. And I'm going to pull this out of the geometry. And I'll go ahead and pull this on all the way through now this new panel geometry. And I'll go ahead and run that again. Actually, I'm going to take the NURB surface now and unpreview it. And so the next thing that we'll see after I run it will be the panel system. I'll hit pause, but I'll give you an idea how long it took it to run. Actually, that was amazingly quick. That took less than 15 seconds for it to run that time. So we see all the dots back again. I don't know why that is. I don't know if these are in preview. No. Oh, that's because points are showing here. So I don't have a way of hiding the points there. But if we go out to Revit, we shouldn't have them showing because all we've done is exported the panels into Revit. So let me close this down. And inside of here we have, and these previews always show up. This color is really terrible. So let's go ahead to materials and change that color a minute. Let's just go back to a gray. Really ugly how long it takes it to process some of these. Although they're not this teeny tiny files, it just really shouldn't take this long to regenerate. Just a change in the color of those tiles like it does. I'll click OK, and let's. I'll go ahead and set up some rendering settings. I'm gonna put it on pause. You can adjust your rendering settings too. So let me just put it on pause. Okay, so I've gone ahead and made some adjustments here, and I've got it in realistic rendering, and I've got show edges on now just to demonstrate, you know, that it is panelized as a triangular arrangement, which means it could be constructed out of flat pieces of glass and or steel or planar objects like ceramic, anything like that. But I'm going to turn the show edges off, which will give it a little more realistic appearance. And I've got it, you know, showing with a little bit of shadow detail in that. So I hit apply. All right, so that's it. I've adjusted the color, obviously, to more gray neutral. And if we look back at Dynamo, the one thing that you probably have different is that if the NURB surface by points has a preview on, which means you'd see it in Dynamo and in Revit. And I go back to Revit now. It's probably going to take a second because it wants to update that screen. All right, so we can see the, see now we shouldn't be seeing that. That should be, oops, I highlighted the wrong thing. I'm sorry. My bad. This is the one I wanted to highlight, preview. That's the NURB surface inside of Dynamo. But if we go back over to Revit now, we get the blue hinting, we get all the pass-through data of Dynamo. So in order to make things like that not show up on this screen, in Dynamo we need to turn all the previews off. because ultimately we are just exporting it to Revit. So I'll turn this off. And if you go back to Revit then, you're not seeing any of the Revit or the Dynamo previews. So let's do one final step here as a matter of housekeeping. So I'm going to bring all of these things, kind of arrange these a little bit, kind of consolidate them, and then make a group out of them. You know, the idea of organizing your data here is not just important if we're creating complex geometry. We could be creating a script that's changing levels or doing some other kind of adjustments to the BIM environment, manipulating data, and we might want to share it with others so they could do it. I'm going to right-click and group this, and we'll call this, let's give it a color, and I'll call this panels. All right, so now we've created really a bulk of the project, this of what I think are the deliverables, the dot pattern and the panels, to be able to exhibit those and show them. But next we're going to look at this idea of creating real 1 foot by 4 foot panel system, and then turning on the panel or its depth based on logic about how bright or dark it is.